The fence post hit the mud with a sound like a wet slap, and Aaron Rhodes swore under his breath as the whole rotted corner of Vola Doomhammer's property line sagged sideways into the swamp water. He had not planned to stop. He had been poling his flat-bottomed skiff through the narrow channel between the stilt-houses of Brackhollow on his way to check his hives, 3 of which sat on a raised platform behind the widow's lot. The hives were his livelihood, 22 colonies of river bees whose honey was golden and thick, and tasted of marsh clover and wild reed flower, and which he sold to the traders who came upriver from the city of Geraint twice a season. He had been a beekeeper in the Delta for 6 years, long enough to know the channels by feel and the tides by the ache in his knees, and he minded his business with the careful, habitual quietness of a man who had learned that being unnoticed was its own form of survival. But the fence post had fallen, and he had watched it fall from the bow of his skiff, and he had seen the gap it left in the line of pale reedwood stakes that kept Vola Doomhammer's small yard such as it was, a raised platform of pine planking jacked up on cypress legs, from bleeding into the muck of the channel. Without that corner post, the whole eastern run of fencing would lean and eventually collapse into the water, and with it would go the 2 terraced garden beds she kept on the edge of the platform, the ones where she grew night pepper and swamp fennel, and the small dark plums that orc healers used to make a paste for fevers. Aaron pulled his skiff to the narrow dock ladder and tied it off. He told himself he was only doing it because the garden beds would come down on his hive platform if the fence gave way. He told himself that twice. He climbed up, found a spare post from the woodpile stacked under the dock overhang. It was her wood, but she had more than she needed and the stack was half sunk in standing water anyway, and he set to work driving it in. That was when he felt the gaze on his back. He turned slowly, hammer in hand, mud to the knee of his canvas work trousers, and looked toward the door of the stilt-house. It was open, not wide, not inviting. Open the way a door opens when the person standing behind it has not decided yet whether to step out or slam it shut. And in that narrow dark rectangle stood Vola Doomhammer, and she was watching him with an expression that could have meant fury or suspicion or something else entirely, and Aaron Rhodes could not tell which. He had seen her before, the way you see a neighbor in a swamp town across a channel, from the back as she was hauling water, once at the reed market when he was buying wax cloth and she was selling bundles of dried fennel to old Marin the apothecary. He had not spoken to her. No one in Brackhollow spoke to her much. She was an orc and she was a widow, and she had come to this particular stilt-house in the Western Channel 3 years ago with nothing but 2 packs and a long-handled adze, and a look on her face that made the dockmen step back without being asked. She was tall, nearly a hand taller than Aaron himself, with the broad, powerful shoulders and deep chest of the Highland orcish folk who had once ranged across the ridge country 200 miles north. Her skin was the deep, warm green of old river moss, her tusks short and elegant, curving upward from a wide, composed mouth. She wore a fitted leather bodice, chestnut brown and laced with dark cord up the center, shaped precisely to her form, over a linen shirt the color of flax that was tucked into wide-legged work trousers of dark canvas gathered at the knee. Her feet were bare on the planking. Her black hair was braided back and secured with a strip of river reed, though 2 thick strands had pulled loose and framed her face, a face that was striking in its severity, with high green cheekbones and dark amber eyes that right now were fixed on Aaron with the steady, assessing patience of a hawk on a fence rail. He raised the hammer in a kind of explanatory gesture. "Post fell," he said. She said nothing. "I have hives behind your lot," he said. 3 colonies, on the platform out back. I was passing and I saw it go. Figured it would take your garden beds into the channel before the week was out." Still nothing. The amber eyes moved from the hammer to the post to the mud on his knees and back to his face. Aaron turned back to the post and drove it the rest of the way in. He tamped the earth around the base with the flat of the hammer head, checked the angle, tamped again. Then he restrung the 2 runs of split-reed fencing through the eye hooks on either side and tested the tension. Solid. It would hold through the summer storms if it was set well. He turned again. She was still in the doorway, still watching. "Done," he said. "Sorry for the disturbance." He went back down the ladder, untied the skiff, and pushed off. He did not look back. He was halfway to the hive platform when he heard the door close, quiet as a held breath. That was the first day of the marsh summer, when the heat came off the water in white curtains and the reed flowers opened orange and the bees worked from before dawn until after dark, fat with pollen. Aaron fixed the fence post and went home to his skiff and his hives and his one-room floating house on the main channel. And he thought about the look in those amber eyes for a good deal longer than he meant to. The next week he found a small bundle on the dock below his hive platform. Dried swamp fennel tied with reed cord. No note. He knew where it was from. He used it to smoke the hives during his next inspection, and the bees were unusually calm. He did not go back to her dock, but he started leaving the channel side of his skiff clear when he passed her house, the way you leave room for someone who might want to hail you. She never hailed him. The summer deepened. The delta swelled with rain in the 3rd week of harvest month, the channels rising until the lower stilt houses stood ankle-deep, and the reed market had to move to the high platform above the old mill. Aaron spent 3 days bailing his hive platforms and lashing them higher against the flood, working in rain that came sideways off the estuary and soaked him through before he reached the first colony. He was on his 4th platform, the one behind Vola's lot, when he noticed that her fennel beds had survived the flood and her fence had held. He was checking the queen excluders on the last hive when her voice came from behind him. Low, flat, accented with the rolled vowels of the Highland Orcish dialect. "You are getting water in the 2nd hive box." He spun around. She was standing on her platform in the rain, arms folded, wearing an oilskin cloak she had thrown over the leather bodice, watching him with that same unwavering attention. He looked at the 2nd box. She was right. The lid had shifted and rainwater was pooling under the inner cover. He fixed it in 30 seconds, cursing quietly. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. Rain ran off the end of her nose. She did not seem to notice or care. "How do you know about hive boxes?" he asked. A pause. A very slight compression of her lips that might have been the ghost of something rueful. "My husband kept bees on the ridge country before. The word landed the way such words always do, full, heavy, final. Aaron did not ask what before meant. Everyone in Brackhollow knew some version of the story. Vola Doomhammer had come down from the ridge country 3 years ago, and she had come alone, and she had been married, and she was not anymore. "I am sorry," he said. He meant it the way a person means it when they have also lost something and know the weight of the word. She looked at him for a moment. The rain kept falling. Then she turned and went back inside, but it was different from the first time. The first time the door had closed like punctuation. This time it closed like a pause. The rain stopped by evening, and the channels settled, and Aaron hung his wet things to dry on the line across the bow of his floating house, and thought about a man on a ridge, keeping bees, and a woman who had learned to watch hive boxes from the platform of her grief. The trouble with Magistrate Aldrin Foss began at the reed market on the first clear day after the flood. Foss was the appointed magistrate of Brackhollow and 3 of the surrounding delta settlements. A thin man of late middle age with the careful grooming and sharp eyes of someone who had spent a long time in minor authority and had convinced himself it was major. He had a dock guard of 6 men in leather jerkins stamped with the Redan scale sigil of the Garrant River Authority, and he used them for tax collection and enforcement, and also, it had become apparent over the last 2 years, for the removal of residents he considered inconvenient. The Orcs who had settled in the Delta after the end of the Brackwater accord the treaty that had ended the last of the Highland Wars and opened the river settlements to Orcish traders and homesteaders, occupied a legal gray area that Foss liked to press. The accord gave them the right of passage and trade. It did not, he argued, give them the right of permanent residence without a charter of domicile granted by the regional authority, which was him. Vola Doomhammer did not have a charter of domicile. She had bought her stilt-house from a man named Peric who had skipped downriver owing debts, and the sale was recorded in the market ledger but not in Foss's office. And Foss had apparently decided in the season before this one that it was time to do something about it. Aaron heard about this at the market, from old Marin the apothecary, who was small and sharp-tongued and had lived in Brackhollow for 40 years and had opinions about everything. "He sent her a notice 2 weeks ago," Marin said, bagging Aaron's beeswax in brown cloth. "A notice of irregular occupation, giving her until the end of harvest month to present a valid domicile charter or vacate." Aaron set his coin on the counter. "And if she doesn't, then Foss's boys come with a barge and load her things off the platform and float the house downriver to wherever they float unwanted things, I suppose." Marin's eyes were bright with anger. "She has been here 3 years. She pays her market fees. She keeps that house better than half the others on that channel. But she is an orc and she came here under the accord, and Foss does not like the accord, and there you are." Aaron walked home along the high-plank road above the flood line thinking about charter of domicile and end of harvest month, and a woman standing in a doorway in the rain telling him his hive box was taking on water. Harvest month was 6 weeks away. He went back to her dock 3 days later. He did not bring anything. He climbed the ladder and knocked on the frame of the door. The door was open. It was always open in the heat, and she was at the small table inside, grinding dried pepper in a stone mortar with the focused patience of someone who grinds their own pepper as a form of meditation. She looked up at him and said nothing, which was not surprise and not welcome and not refusal. It was simply the ground state she occupied, and he was beginning to understand that it was not hostility. It was a woman who had learned to spend words the way you spend coin in a lean year, carefully, and only when the purchase was worth it. "I heard about Foss's notice," he said. Her jaw tightened fractionally. She kept grinding. "I know a man in Garant," he said. "A land charter clerk named Obi. He helped me register my hive platforms when I started here. He is not cheap, but he is fast, and he knows the accord provisions better than Foss does. The accord has a residential clause for dependent resource workers, people whose livelihood is tied to a specific waterway or land parcel. You sell at the market, you have a fixed structure, you cultivate, you likely qualify." She stopped grinding. The amber eyes came up and fixed on him with the full weight of her attention, which was, he had begun to realize, a thing of considerable magnitude. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it is useful information." "Why are you bringing me useful information?" Aaron considered being evasive and decided against it. "Because I fixed your fence post, and you told me my hive box was taking on water, and that seems like the beginning of a reasonable understanding between neighbors." A silence. Outside, a reed warbler was going frantic in the channel rushes. The river made its slow, thick sound under the floor of the house, moving around the cypress legs like a patient argument. "I cannot pay a Garant clerk," she said finally. "Not this season." "I know," he said. "I am going to Garant at the end of next week to sell honey. I will bring Obi the case." The amber eyes narrowed very slightly. Not in suspicion exactly. In the way of a person who has been surprised by something and is taking a moment to verify that the surprise is real. "You do not know me." "I know you enough," he said. "You kept my fennel, you watched my hives in the rain, that is enough for me." He said it simply, the way you say a plain thing, and then he went back down the ladder before she could form an argument, and he heard from behind him, very quiet, almost lost in the sound of the warbler and the river, something that might have been the beginning of a thank you that she did not quite finish. He smiled into the water as he untied his skiff. He did not let her see. He went to Garant. Obi was a small, ink-stained man who lived in organized chaos and knew the Brackwater Accord down to its least cited subprovisions. He listened to Aaron's account, asked 6 pointed questions about Vola's market registration and cultivation dates and the recorded purchase of the property, and then drew 3 sheets of parchment from a drawer and began writing. "She qualifies under Section 14, Obi said, not looking up. Dependent agricultural use, fixed structure, continuous habitation exceeding 2 years. Foss knows this. He is hoping she does not." "He is probably right that she does not," Aaron said. "Well, now she will." Obi pressed his seal into wax on the 3rd sheet. "This is a provisional charter of domicile valid for 3 years, registered with the River Authority of Garant. Foss cannot override it." "He will be furious." "Yes," Aaron said. "That is fine." He sold his honey 40 jars of the good golden summer pressing, and 12 of the dark, complex autumn reserve he had been holding to 3 separate buyers, and made enough to cover Obi's fee with silver left over, and he sailed back down the river to Brackhollow with the charter folded carefully inside his oilskin pouch. He brought it to her door on a Tuesday morning, when the light was flat and gold, and the channel was still. She was on her platform pulling dead fronds off the night pepper plants. She was not wearing the oilskin, just the fitted leather bodice over the flax linen shirt and the wide canvas trousers, and her feet bare on the boards. She moved with a deliberate physical grace that Aaron had noticed before and made a point of not staring at, the way you make a point of not staring at a fire because you know if you start you will not stop. He climbed up and held out the oilskin pouch without preamble. "Your charter, 3 years, registered. Foss cannot touch it." She took it from him slowly. She opened it. She read it. He could tell she was a careful reader, her eyes moving with precise attention, and the only sign that she felt anything was that her hands went very still on the parchment, the way hands go still when a person is working hard not to show that something has reached them. "This cost you," she said. "Honey prices were good." Aaron. His name in her mouth was a new thing, low and rounded, the Highland accent giving the 2nd syllable a slight lift, and he was not prepared for what the sound of it did to him. "This cost you significantly." He met her eyes. "You are worth significantly." She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that the reed warbler started up again, and a punt boat went by on the channel below, and the poleman looked up curiously at the orc woman and the mud-kneed beekeeper standing on the platform in the morning light. Then she folded the charter very carefully and held it against her chest, just for a second, and something moved across her face, old and complicated and quickly guarded again, but real, unmistakably real. "Come inside," she said. "I will make tea." It was the first time she had said those words, and he understood they cost her something. He went inside. Her house was small and immaculate and spoke its own language. The shelves were organized with quiet precision, dried herbs in labeled jars, tools clean and hung on pegs, a single carved wooden figure on the window ledge that was clearly orcish craft, old and worn smooth from handling, a stylized running figure he thought might be a wolf or a horse. There were 2 good knives on the wall and a long-handled adze under the bed, and a small iron stove with a dented pot that had been repaired at least twice. There was no softness in it. No cushions or woven throws or small pleasant objects kept for beauty's sake. Every object in the room worked for its presence. It was the home of someone who had decided that necessity was enough, and had been deciding that every day for a long time. She made tea from dried rivermint and something smoky he did not recognize, and she sat across the table from him, and for a while they drank in the silence that was no longer precisely uncomfortable, and outside the channel moved and the heat built slowly in the reed beds. "You should know," she said eventually, "that Foss will not be satisfied by a charter." "I know. He will look for another angle. He has been moving people out of the western channels. 2 families of bogfolk last spring, a half-blood trader before that. He has a plan for this part of the settlement, I think. He wants certain people gone." "Yes," Aaron said, "I think that is right. I am telling you this because you should understand what you are stepping into by helping me." He wrapped both hands around his tea mug. "I appreciate the warning." Her eyes searched his face for something. Whatever she found there seemed to settle her slightly. Not soften, settle, like a foundation that stops shifting. "You are a strange man, Aaron Rhodes." "How so?" She thought about it. which he was already learning was her way. She did not answer until she had turned the question thoroughly. Most human men in this town look at me and see a problem that has not yet been dealt with, or they look at me the way men look at things they want but believe they are not allowed to want. You look at me like I am a person who is present in the same place as you. You are, he said. She looked at the table, just for a moment, then back up. Yes, she said, that is the strange part. He walked home along the channel feeling like something had shifted in the world, subtle and total. The way the current changes when the tide turns, still the same river but going a different direction. Foss's next move came 2 weeks later and was less legal and more personal. Aaron was at the morning market, selling his summer reserve from a table beside old Marin's stall, when 2 of Foss's dock guards came through the market and went to Vola's selling spot. She came twice a week with dried herbs and medicinal pastes and small tallow candles she made from swamp wax, and began questioning her loudly about her right to trade, specifically about whether her market registration was tied to her domicile registration, specifically whether the domicile registration was legitimate. Aaron was 12 stalls away. He heard the raised voices and saw the way the market crowd shifted the way crowds shift when something is happening that most people don't want to see but can't help watching. He packed his remaining jars into the carry crate, lifted it, and walked over. One of the guards was a thick-armed man named Culver who Aaron had seen shake down a bog-folk fisherman the previous spring. Culver was holding Vola's market ledger open, pointing at an entry, making an argument about dates. The second guard stood behind him, with the practiced indifference of someone waiting for the order to do something unpleasant. Vola stood with her arms at her sides and her chin level, not flinching, not arguing, not retreating. She was exactly as tall as Culver and significantly broader through the shoulder, and she was looking at him with the amber-eyed patience of a woman who had seen worse than this, and was simply waiting for it to be over. Aaron set his crate down on the planking. The domicile charter is registered with the River Authority of Garant under Section 14 of the Brackwater Accord, he said, loudly enough that the nearest 24 market-goers could hear. The market registration is tied to the property registration, which is valid. You have no legal grounds to challenge the trading permit. Culver turned to look at him. Who in the Delta are you? Aaron Rhodes. I am the beekeeper on the main channel. He reached into his shirt and produced the copy of the charter he had been carrying since the day Obi had sealed it, not because he'd planned to need it exactly, but because he had understood that a man like Foss would push again, and that being ready was better than being right. This is a copy of the registered charter. The original is with the River Authority. Do you want to take this to the magistrate? We can do that right now, or you can note in your ledger that the registration was verified and move on. A silence. The market had gone very quiet. 30 or 40 people were watching. Marin was watching from 3 stalls over with an expression of concentrated satisfaction. Culver looked at the parchment, looked at Aaron, looked at Vola, who had not moved and whose expression had not changed, though something in it had shifted, something watchful and intent and not quite readable. Culver closed the ledger. He handed it back to Vola without ceremony. He and his partner walked away. The market exhaled. People went back to their business, though the whispers went with them. Aaron picked up his crate. You did not need to do that, Vola said quietly for him only. I know, he said. He looked at her directly. I wanted to. She held the ledger against her chest and looked at him with something new behind the amber, not gratitude exactly, because he was already learning that Vola Doomhammer did not do gratitude the way most people did, performatively, with profuse words. She did it the way she did everything else, completely internally, translated outward in actions rather than speech. What he saw in her eyes was something fiercer than gratitude, something that recognized him. Your honey, she said. Is it the light summer variety or the dark autumn reserve? Both, he said, though I have fewer of the autumn jars now. I want 2 of the summer, she said. I will trade you swamp fennel and a pot of fever paste. The paste is worth more than 2 jars at market price. "I know that. Take the trade anyway." He took it. He was smiling walking home, and he did not try to stop this time. The summer moved through its last warm weeks and into the breath of early autumn, when the heat cracked at night and the channel mist came in heavier and the bees shifted their behavior, flying later in the morning and ranging less far. Aaron knew this season intimately. It was the season of the autumn reserve, when the colonies produced the dark, complex honey that brought in most of his year's income, and he spent long days at the hive platforms managing the supers and extracting frames in his small workshed on the main channel, running the extractor by hand and pressing the wax clean. He started, without quite planning to, leaving the skiff at Vola's dock 2 or 3 times a week, not for any declared reason. He would come by to check the hives and end up tarrying longer. She would be working, always some precise, necessary task, and she would say something in passing and he would answer, and they would fall into a conversation that neither of them seemed to know how to end. He learned that she had grown up in the Grey Moss Ridge country, 2 days north, in an orcish settlement called Ironhold that had been burned and dispersed in the last years of the Highland Wars. He learned that her husband, Vola Doomhammer, had been a beekeeper and a hunter and a man of considerable quality, and that he had died of a marsh fever 3 winters ago, the kind that came in fast and left no room for bargaining. He learned that she had come to Brackhollow because it was far from the ridge, and because she did not want to rebuild what she had lost in the same landscape that had held it. She learned that he had grown up in a river town 100 miles east called Crestfall, that his father had been a grain merchant and his mother had died when he was 12, that he had come to Brackhollow 6 years ago with a borrowed skiff and enough money to buy 10 nucleus colonies, and had built from there. She learned that he had been alone for most of his adult life, not from lack of trying, but from a particular combination of quietness and ordinariness that, as he put it plainly one evening while they shared a pot of her smoky tea on the platform rail, made him easy to overlook. "People look past me," he said, not complaining, just stating. "I have noticed it since I was young. I am not remarkable." She looked at him across the platform rail. The evening light was copper-red on the water, and the bats were starting their first passes above the reed beds, and she had her arms folded on the rail, and her braid falling over one shoulder, and she was looking at him with the full, level weight of her attention that by now he knew was not a casual thing. "You went a garrant for a stranger," she said. "You stood in front of Culver in a market full of people who were waiting to see what would happen. You fixed a fence post that was not yours to fix." She paused. "You are not overlooked, Aaron Rhodes. You are in a town full of people who are too small to see what they are looking at." He was quiet for a moment. The bat made another pass. The water moved under them with its slow, constant patience. "That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a long time," he said. She looked away at the river. "Do not make it sentimental," she said, but there was no edge in it. It was said the way you say something when the sentiment is real and the saying of it has cost you and you are covering the cost with sharpness. He did not push. He was learning not to push. He was learning to be present without demanding, to offer without requiring, to let her come to the edges of herself in her own time, the way you approach a colony that does not know you yet, slowly, without sudden movements, letting the warmth of your presence precede your hands. Foss came to him directly in the second week of early autumn. He came to the main channel dock where Aaron's floating house was moored, in the morning before market, with one guard at his back and the careful courtesy of a man who has decided to try one more civil option before the less civil ones. "Mr. Rhodes," Foss said. He was in his market coat, the one with the river authority buttons. "I understand you have taken an interest in the situation of the orc woman on the West Channel." "Her name is Vola Doomhammer," Aaron said. He was standing in the bow of his floating house with a frame of honeycomb in one hand and a scraping knife in the other, because he had been mid-extraction when the boat appeared. He did not put the frame down. "Yes," Foss's mouth compressed briefly. "Her situation. I want to be direct with you. I have plans for the West Channel. There is a merchant from Garrant who is interested in building a salt warehouse on those 3 lots, The money is significant. The dock permits are already being drafted. What I need is for those 3 lots to be vacant. One of those lots is occupied by a legal resident with a registered charter, Aaron said. The charter was registered by a clerk in Garant who does not understand the full local statutes. Foss's voice remained pleasant. There are grounds to contest it. It is not as solid as you may believe. It is solid enough that you have not contested it already, Aaron said. A pause. Foss's eyes were flat and careful. Mr. Rhodes, you sell honey. You have 18 or 20 hive platforms in this delta. I have the authority to review the placement permits for all of them. Hive platforms on public waterways require a commercial waterway use permit, renewed annually. I would hate for there to be a problem with your renewals. Aaron looked at him for a long moment. He scraped the last of the comb into the collection bucket, slow and deliberate. Are you threatening my hive licenses, magistrate? I am outlining a regulatory reality, Foss said smoothly. I think a reasonable man would consider it. And what if the orc woman does not want to go? Foss smiled the way small authority men smile when they believe they hold all the cards. Then the situation will become considerably less pleasant for everyone involved, including her. He left. Aaron stood in the bow of his floating house looking at the water for a long time. That evening he went to Vola's dock and climbed up and knocked on the door frame, and she was at the stove, and she looked at him once and said, "What happened?" not as a question. He told her everything Foss had said, word for word, the way he did things without softening or framing, just the plain account. She listened with her arms folded and her back against the stove, and when he was done she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He will take your permits. Maybe. Not maybe. He will do it. He is that kind of man." Her jaw was set. "This is what I told you. I told you what you were stepping into. I know, Aaron." She pushed off the stove and took one step toward him, and in the small room that one step was significant, and she was looking at him with an expression that he had not seen on her before, urgent, almost stricken, controlled at the edges but not entirely controlled. "I cannot be the reason you lose what you have built. You understand me, I cannot be that." "You are not the reason," he said. "Foss is the reason. Do not be clever with me right now." "I am not being clever." He held her gaze. "I have 22 colonies and 6 years in this delta, and I am not going to step back from a bully with leverage to keep them. Not when the thing he is bullying me about is right." She stared at him. The stove crackled behind her. The channel lapped at the cypress legs below. She looked like she was trying to find the argument and coming up empty. "You are," she said finally, slowly, "a very frustrating man." "I have been told," he said. Something softened in the amber eyes just slightly, just at the edges, the way ice softens before it gives. She looked at him for another moment, and then she turned back to the stove and stirred something in the pot. And he sat down at her table without being invited, and she did not tell him to go. And that was the night they ate together for the first time. A thick soup of night pepper and dried fish and something smoky and good. And the mist came off the channel, and the lantern on the wall made everything warm and close. And she told him about the Grey Moss Ridge, and the way the highland bees were different from the river bees, larger, darker, more aggressive but far more productive. And he told her about the year a flood took out 5 of his platforms, and he rebuilt every one from salvage wood, and they talked until the lantern was low and the soup was gone, and neither of them seemed to be in a hurry to end it. He left eventually, because it was late and the tide was turning and his skiff would be harder to handle in the channel dark. At the dock ladder she was standing at the rail above him, looking down. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I have more fennel than I can use, and I would rather have help with the drying than do it alone." He looked up at her in the lantern light. This green-skinned woman with her braided black hair coming loose at the edges and the worn leather bodice and the frank, guarded amber eyes. And he thought, there it is. That is the moment, because she did not say come back for practical reasons. She said come back because she wanted him to come back. And she had found the practical reason to hang it on, so neither of them had to say it plainly yet. And he loved her for it already, the careful way she was learning to ask. "I will be here at first light," he said. She nodded. He pushed off. He was grinning in the dark the whole way home. The fennel drying was genuine work. There were 3 large bundles that needed to be split and hung properly, and it took most of the morning, the 2 of them working side by side on the platform in the early autumn sun. And the domestic ordinariness of it was somehow more charged than anything dramatic might have been. Just the closeness of 2 people working together, arms occasionally brushing, occasionally reaching past each other for cord or hooks, the comfortable rhythm of shared labor. She told him, in the middle of bundling the second run of stalks, about the morning she had arrived at Brackhollow 3 years ago, how she had stepped off the upriver trader's barge with her 2 packs and the adze and the charter of sail for Perrick's house, and how the dockmen had looked at her the way dockmen look at a large green-skinned woman carrying an adze in a small human river town, with the specific, frozen quality of people who are deciding whether to be hostile or to simply pretend she does not exist, and how she had looked back at them and said nothing and walked down the channel plank to her house and spent the first 3 days repairing the floor and the second 3 days reinforcing the platform, and had not spoken to anyone for 2 full weeks. "You were rebuilding," he said. "I was," she said. "Not just the house." She stopped tying the bundle and looked at him sideways, and he was very close to her because the platform was small and they had been working side by side for 2 hours. He could see the precise curve of her tusks and the way the autumn light hit the green of her skin and turned it deep and warm like light through old glass. "No," she said, very quietly. "Not just the house." He reached out slowly with no sudden movements, the beekeeper's instinct, and he brushed a piece of dried reed off her shoulder, fingers just barely touching the linen of her shirt above the leather bodice, and her breath caught. Very slightly. Almost nothing. But he felt it because he was paying the kind of attention you pay to something that matters more than anything else in your current life. She did not pull away. She went very still, the way she went still in the rain looking at the charter, internal and complete and utterly present. He withdrew his hand. He went back to the fennel. After a moment she did too. But the air between them was different, charged with something that had been named without words, and neither of them was pretending any more that they were only drying herbs. Foss made his move in the 4th week of early autumn, and it was worse than threatened. He did not come for Vola's house directly. He came for Aaron's hive platforms. As promised, a notice of permit review delivered by Culver to the main channel dock, citing 17 irregular placements and requesting payment of back fees totaling a sum that was, almost to the coin, exactly what Aaron had in reserve after paying Obi. Paying it would bankrupt his working capital. Fighting it would take months and require a guarant advocate he could not afford. It was, Aaron thought, reading the notice at his kitchen table, elegantly designed to break 2 people by breaking 1. He was sitting with that thought when Vola appeared at his dock. She never came to his dock. He had always gone to her. He heard the footstep on the plank and looked up, and she was standing in the door of his floating house, ducking slightly because the door was cut for a shorter person, and she looked at the notice in his hand. "He sent it," she said. "He sent it." She came inside. She looked around his house the way he had looked around hers, reading it, learning it. His was less ordered than hers, more comfortable, with a battered armchair near the stove and a shelf of books and his extractor gleaming in the back corner, and jars of honey in varying shades from pale gold to near black lined up on the window sill like a row of bottled light. She sat down across from him. "How much?" he told her. She was quiet. Then, "I have 53 silver marks saved, from 3 years of market sales. I was going to use them to replace the hive platform lumber in the spring." She said it flatly, like a balance sheet. "It is not enough, but it is something." He stared at her. "Vola, absolutely not. Do not be proud with me. I am not being proud. I am telling you that I will not take your 3 years of savings to pay Foss's invented fees." "Then, what do you intend to do?" He looked at the notice for a long moment. He had been thinking, since the moment he opened it, about something Obi had said during their Garant meeting, that Foss knew the charter was solid, that he was working from intimidation rather than law, that a magistrate who operates through invented regulations in clear violation of the Brackwater Accord was one formal complaint away from a review by the River Authority's inspector. One formal complaint, filed by a named resident with standing. "I intend," Aaron said slowly, "to write a very detailed letter to the River Authority in Garant, documenting every action Foss has taken in the last 3 months, including the market confrontation, the direct threat to my permits, and this notice. And I intend to ask Marin and 2 other market vendors who witnessed the market confrontation to sign it as supporting witnesses." Vola's eyes had sharpened. "That could take months. He could move before then. Maybe. But I think Foss is careful. I think he knows that if the River Authority inspector comes to Brackhollow and finds that he has physically removed a legal resident and bankrupt a commercial beekeeper in the same season, his comfortable magistrate position becomes very uncomfortable." He tapped the notice. "He is bluffing with this. The amounts are wrong, they do not match the actual permit schedule. He did the math to frighten, not to stand up to scrutiny." Vola looked at him steadily. "And if you are wrong?" "Then we fight it on the ground," he said. "Together." The word sat between them. Together. She looked at it. He could almost see her looking at it the way she read the charter, carefully testing the edges. "Together," she repeated. "If you will have it," he said. She held his gaze for a long beat of silence that contained, he thought, approximately everything they had not yet said directly. "Write the letter," she said. "I will go to Marin." They moved fast, the 2 of them, and Aaron found in the next several days that Vola Doomhammer, who moved slow in matters of the heart, moved like water through a broken dam in matters of practical defense. She had Marin and 2 other vendors signed as witnesses by the following morning. She had a 3rd supporting statement from a bogfolk trader named Yesick, who had himself been moved out of a West Channel lot the previous spring, and had documents to prove the pressure Foss had applied. She organized these papers with the same precise economy she organized her herb jars, and she came to Aaron's table with them stacked and labeled, and he looked at the pile and felt something warm and solid move through his chest. "This is good," he said. "This is very good." "Do not be surprised," she said. "I was the record keeper for my husband's settlement on the ridge for 8 years. He looked up at her. "You did not tell me that. You did not ask." But there was a faint, real smile at the edge of her mouth, barely there enough. It was, he realized, only the 2nd time he had seen it. He sent the letter to Garant by the next upriver trader's boat. The waiting was the hardest part, because neither of them was suited to waiting, and Foss was not idle in the interim. He sent 2 more notices, both to Aaron, both citing different imagined infractions, both arriving with Culver's flat face behind them. And he sent one more directly to Vola's door. This one not a notice but a verbal message delivered by Culver, to the effect that the magistrate would appreciate a meeting to discuss her future in the settlement. Vola relayed this to Aaron word for word at his kitchen table that evening. "He wants you to come to him alone," Aaron said. "Yes. You should not." "I know." She looked at him. "I was not planning to. I was planning to send back the message that my affairs in the settlement are registered and legal, and that any discussions he wishes to have can be conducted at the market in front of witnesses." He smiled. "That is perfect." "I know," she said again, and this time there was the smile again, quick and real, almost surprised by itself, as if it did not quite expect to be there. It undid him slightly every time. The inspector from the River Authority arrived on a gray morning in early autumn, 12 days after Aaron sent the letter, on the regular courier barge from Garant. He was a broad, weathered man named Thaddeus, who wore the River Authority seal on a chain, and carried a leather case of documents, and had the specific energy of someone who has seen a great many small authority men doing large authority things and finds it tiresome. Thaddeus asked for Foss first, then for Aaron, then for Vola, and conducted each meeting at the market house table with the focused attention of a man who does his job without theater. He reviewed every document. He reviewed Foss's fee notice and the permit schedule and confirmed, without apparent surprise, that the amounts did not correspond to any registered rate. He reviewed Vola's charter and confirmed its validity under Section 14 of the Accord. He asked Marin and Yesick to repeat their accounts of the market confrontation, which they did at length and with considerable precision. He was in Brackhollow for 2 days. On the morning of the second day, he called Aaron and Vola to the market house and told them that the fee notice was being formally nullified, that Foss's administration of the West Channel lots was being placed under review, and that the magistrate had been given a formal advisement from the River Authority regarding his obligations under the Brackwater Accord. He said it without ceremony, standing at the market house table with his leather case open. Then he closed the case and said, "The West Channel lots are not to be disturbed pending review. That includes the lot of Vola Doomhammer." He looked at both of them. "Do you understand the situation?" "Yes," Aaron said. "Yes," Vola said. Thaddeus left on the afternoon barge. Foss was not at the dock to see him off. The market square was not empty. About 40 people had gathered in the morning to watch Thaddeus arrive, and about the same number were there in the afternoon when word spread that the review was done and the fee notice nullified, and Aaron and Vola walked out of the market house into the square with the case resolved, and the crowd was watching with the particular quality of attention that a small town has when the outcome of a thing that involves all of them has just been determined. Marin was at the front of the crowd. She raised her hand in a gesture of clear, unambiguous approval. Yesick grinned. Several other market vendors called out Aaron's name, Vola's name, various things that were not quite words of celebration, but in the aggregate amounted to one. And then Vola Doomhammer did something that no one in Brackhollow had seen coming. She turned to face the crowd. 40 people. Market vendors, dock workers, bogfolk traders, the apothecary, the mill keeper, the woman who sold smoked eels from a platform at the channel's edge. She looked at them with the full, level weight of her amber eyes, and she spoke loudly enough for every one of them to hear. "I am Vola Doomhammer," she said. "I'm a resident of the West Channel, and I have a registered charter of domicile, and I will be here next season and the season after that. This town is my home." She paused. The square was absolutely still. "And Aaron Rhodes is under my protection. Any person or authority who comes for him comes for me first." The silence that followed was one of those silences that is not empty but full of surprise and recalibration and the rapid processing of what had just been said. Because what Vola had said was not merely a declaration of allied support. What she had said, in the specific phrasing of Orcish custom, which several people in that square knew well enough to recognize, was a protection claim. In the Highland Orcish tradition, to say someone is under my protection in front of witnesses was not a friendly gesture. It was a formal claim of bond. It was the kind of thing a person said about a mate, a partner, a person they had taken as their own in the eyes of their community. It meant, "This one is mine to defend, and my strength stands between them and any hand raised against them." Marin's eyebrows had risen to an unprecedented altitude. Yesick was staring at Vola with an expression of profound admiration. The mill-keeper's wife had put her hand over her mouth, and Aaron Rhodes was standing very still, because he was a man who had spent 6 years in this delta, and who had, in that time, learned enough about Orcish custom from the bogfolk and Highland traders to know exactly what Vola had just said in front of 40 witnesses, and it was taking him a significant moment to process the fact that she had said it in public about him. He turned to look at her. She was still facing the crowd, chin up, eyes steady, and there was a color in her green cheeks, a warmth, a deepening. That was the Orcish equivalent of what might be called a blush, and she was containing it with the same effort with which she contained everything. But it was there. The crowd murmured and shifted and slowly, in the way of crowds that have just witnessed something they will be talking about for a long time, began to move apart. Aaron stepped very close to her. Not touching but close enough to speak quietly. "Vola," he said. She turned to look at him. The warmth was still in her cheeks. Her jaw was set. She looked for the first and only time he had ever seen it, slightly uncertain, like a person who has leaped from a high place and is now suspended in the air and not sure if the ground below is what they thought it was. "I know what that means," he said quietly. "In your tradition, I know what you said." "Yes," she said. "Did you mean it?" A pause, long enough to be real, short enough to not be doubt. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he reached up and took her hand, her left hand, the one that was by her side, the one that was very slightly not quite still. And he held it, in the open air of the market square, with the last of the crowd still dispersing around them. Her hand was large and strong and warm, and she did not pull it away. She turned her hand and gripped his back firmly, and they stood that way in the autumn light of the square, and something enormous and quiet settled around them, both like the moment after a storm when the air is clean and still, and the world is showing you its real face. "Come home with me," she said. "I want to tell you something that is not easier to say in public." He went. The channel was still in the early afternoon, the light falling flat in gold across the water. They sat on her platform rail, side by side, not quite touching, looking at the river rather than at each other, and she was quiet for a long while. "I want to tell you about the promise I made," she said finally. "When Breck died." He waited. "I made myself a promise that I would not be soft again. That softness was the thing that broke me when he died, and I did not want to be broken like that again." She paused. "I kept that promise for 3 years. I built this house and I made it right, and I kept everything at the distance I needed it at." Another pause, longer. "And then you fixed my fence post." He looked at her sideways. "You were not asked. You did not know me. You fixed it because it needed to be done and because it would have affected your hives, but I do not believe that was the real reason." She folded her hands in her lap, looking at the water. "And you asked for nothing. You came with the charter and you stood in the market and you wrote the letter, and every time I expected you to want something from me, gratitude or deference or acknowledgement, you just kept coming back and fixing things and eating soup at my table." She turned to look at him. "Do you understand what I am saying?" "I think so," he said. "I have not been soft in 3 years," she said. "I do not know if I can be, but I think you are the only person who could make me want to try." He was quiet for a moment. The water moved. A reed bunting called somewhere in the channel grass. "Vola," he said. He turned to face her fully. "I have been alone my whole adult life. Not because I could not find people, but because I could not find one person who saw me. You see me." He said it simply. "I do not need you to be soft. I do not need you to be anything other than what you are. What you are is already—" He stopped. He searched for the word. "Extraordinary," he said. "What you are is already extraordinary." She looked at him with the full weight of the amber eyes, and there was nothing guarded in them now, nothing held at distance. She looked at him like a woman who has been keeping a great fire banked and contained for a long time, and has just, in this moment, decided to let it breathe. She reached out and put her hand against the side of his face. Her palm was warm and her thumb traced very slowly across his cheekbone, and he leaned into her hand the way you lean into warmth when you have been cold for a long time, and she made a low sound, quiet and unguarded, that was not quite a word. He turned his face toward her. The distance between them was nothing. She kissed him. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a woman who had been deciding for a long time and had decided completely, and was not going to be halfway about it. It was slow and warm and certain, and it tasted like the smoky tea and the swamp fennel and 3 years of a door barely open, and a woman standing in it watching. And he kissed her back with everything he had, one hand at her jaw, and she made a sound against his mouth that undid him from the inside out. When they broke apart, they were both breathing differently than they had been. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen before, open, unguarded, almost wondering, like a woman who has discovered something she had forgotten was possible. He was looking at her the same way. "Well," she said. "Yes," he said. She put her forehead against his, the large green brow against his human one, and they sat that way for a moment while the channel moved and the reed buntings called and the gold autumn light stretched long across the water. "I meant what I said in the square," she said quietly against his temple. "I know you did. I do not say things in front of witnesses that I do not mean. I know that too." She pulled back slightly to look at him. "Aaron, I am telling you that I am not, this is not." She stopped and tried again with the precision of a woman who uses language carefully. "I am telling you that I choose you. Do you understand me? I am not exploring. I am not lonely and reaching. I am choosing you specifically." He looked at her for a moment. He felt the warmth of that settle through him like the first truly warm day after a long winter, reaching all the way down. He had been overlooked, ordinary, easy to pass by, for a very long time. He had learned to not think about it too much because thinking about it too much did no one any good. And here was this woman, this fierce, extraordinary, swamp pepper grinding, hive watching, bone deep, magnificent woman looking at him and telling him she had chosen him specifically and not casually, but with the full weight of the Highland Orcish tradition, which was not casual at all. "I understand you," he said. "I choose you back." She held his gaze. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when something was settled and right and did not need more words. "Good," she said. The weeks that followed were a different texture than what had come before. Not easier. Foss was still in his magistrate office, still watchful, still resentful of the review and what it had cost him, but different in the particular way that the world is different when you are no longer carrying your weight alone. Aaron started keeping his skiff at her dock. Not every night, and then more nights than not, and then simply by mutual wordless agreement, consistently. He ate more meals at her table and she ate more meals at his, and sometimes they cooked together in one kitchen and sometimes in the other, and the skiff moved between the two floating homes, so often it had worn its own groove in the channel mud at both docks. She came to the hive platforms with him on the long extraction days, because she knew the work and he had always done it alone, and having a second pair of hands that knew what to do was, as he told her with calculated understatement, not inefficient. She moved among his colonies with the calm, unhurried authority of someone who had grown up around bees, and the colonies accepted her the way they accepted him, as a known presence, as part of the warmth. He helped her extend the garden beds on the eastern edge of her platform, adding 2 new terraced frames of soil that she would use for the highland herbs she had not been able to grow without space, wild sorrel and gray sage, and the small dark purple bergamot that grew in the ridge country and nowhere else in the delta. He built the frames himself from good pine timber that he bought at the mill with the autumn honey proceeds, and she directed him on the angle and depth and drainage with the precise confidence of a woman who had been growing things out of hostile ground for most of her life. Marin came by the West Channel one afternoon and surveyed the two of them working on the new garden beds with a look of uncontained satisfaction. "I want it noted," Marin said, "that I knew this would happen." "You knew nothing," Vola said, without looking up from the soil she was turning. "I knew you were too intelligent to keep that man at a distance for an entire year," Marin said. "That is something." Vola did not answer, but the warmth came into her cheeks again, and Aaron caught it, and Marin caught him catching it, and Marin went away very pleased with herself. Foss came one more time. He came to the West Channel in the first week of late autumn, on a morning when the mist was still thick on the water, and you could not see 3 boat lengths in any direction. He came with Culver and 2 other guards, all 4 of them in a broad, flat barge that moved slowly through the gray. Aaron was on Vola's platform. He had come early before the mist lifted to reinforce 2 of the hive platform supports that had shifted in the overnight cold, and he was still there, having breakfast at her table when they heard the barge coming. Vola heard it first. Her hearing was sharper than his, and she stood up from the table and went to the door and looked out, and then she came back and said, simply, "Foss." Aaron stood up. They went to the platform rail together. The barge emerged from the mist, 4 shapes in it, and drew up to the dock below. Foss stood in the bow. He looked up at the 2 of them at the rail, the large green-skinned orc woman and the mud-kneed beekeeper standing side by side, and his expression was complicated. Not quite defeat, something adjacent to it, wearing the coat of professional composure. "The review has concluded," he said. "I am required to inform you that the West Channel residential lots are confirmed under the Brackwater Accord, all 3 of them, and that the commercial waterway use permits for the hive platforms are renewed in full at the standard schedule rates." He said it like a man reading from a document he dislikes. "This notification satisfies my obligations under the River Authority's review." A silence. The mist moved around them. "Thank you, magistrate," Aaron said. Foss looked at him for a moment with the eyes of a man who has misjudged the weight of what he was carrying and knows it. Then he looked at Vola, and whatever he saw in her face made him decide against any additional remarks. The barge pushed off. It disappeared back into the mist. On the platform, Vola exhaled slowly. Aaron put his hand over hers on the rail. She turned her hand and gripped his. Tight, warm, certain. "It is done," he said. "It is done," she said. They stood at the rail for a while longer, watching the mist move, listening to the water underneath them, the cypress legs holding them up above the river that had held and moved and shifted around this place through all the seasons and all the changes and all the things that had happened and would still happen. He turned to her. She was already looking at him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "I want to know if you want to make this permanent." He held her gaze. "The protection claim. You said it in the square in front of witnesses. I know what that means in your tradition. I want to know if you want to make it formal." She looked at him for a long, full moment. The autumn light was breaking through the mist now, coming through in long gold shafts that hit the water in bright coins. "In the Highland tradition," she said carefully, "a formal bond is spoken at the water at dawn in front of people who matter." She paused. "It is not a ceremony. It is a statement. It is 2 people saying in front of their witnesses what they have already said to each other." "Yes," he said. "There are no officials, no papers needed. It is a word bond." She was watching him closely. "You would be content with that, no human ceremony." "I do not need a ceremony," he said. "I need you." The amber eyes held his for a moment, and then the smile came, not the quick, barely there thing he had seen twice before, but a full, real, almost startled smile, the smile of a woman who has been surprised by the depth of her own happiness, and it opened her face into something extraordinary, and Aaron looked at her and thought, "There it is. That is the real thing. That is the smile underneath all the other expressions, the one she has been keeping in reserve for someone worth showing it to." He cupped her face in both hands. She leaned into it, her large, warm hands coming up to cover his. "Vola Doomhammer," he said. "Aaron Rhodes," she said. "At dawn," he said. "At dawn," she said. "Marin will come. Yesick will come. That is enough." "That is more than enough," he said. She kissed him again, standing in the gold mist morning on her platform above the channel, the bees from his nearby hives beginning their first tentative morning flights, the river moving below them with its constant, patient voice. And the kiss was warm and deep and unhurried, the kiss of 2 people who have finished the part where they were unsure, and all the warmth of what comes next is spread out in front of them like light on the water. They broke apart and stood forehead to forehead, and she made a low humming sound in her chest, a sound he had heard before from her when she was at rest and content working in the herb beds, sitting by the stove, reading with her feet up on the opposite bench, a sound he understood was what peace sounded like coming from the inside of Vola Doomhammer. "I am not soft," she said against his forehead, not a disclaimer, a simple fact. "I know," he said, "but I am this." She was quiet for a moment. "Whatever this is, I am this." "This is mine," he said, "and I am yours." "Yes," she said, "that is what it is." The autumn evening came soft and slow, the way autumn evenings do in the delta when the season is turning from heat to cool, and the reed beds are amber instead of green, and the water has lost its summer silver and gone to a deeper, older bronze. The bees flew until the last light and then came home, every last one of them, and Aaron latched the hive boxes and stood on the platform in the dusk and looked at Vola's lit window across the channel, and felt the rare, animal satisfaction of an animal that has found its ground. He had been a quiet man in a town that had not seen him. He had been easy to overlook, easy to move around, easy to account for without accounting for it all. He had built his hives and extracted his honey and kept his modest, waterborne life with the patient efficiency of someone who has decided that the available forms of joy are enough, even when they are not quite enough, even when the floating house is very quiet in the evenings and the honey is very beautiful and there is no one to show it to. And then a fence post had fallen, and a woman had stood in a doorway and watched him fix it, and the world had quietly, irrevocably changed. The dawn came gray and still over the delta, the kind of dawn that exists before color, all silver and pale blue, the mist low on the water and the reed birds beginning their first tentative calls. Maren was there at the channel platform edge, wrapped in her market coat, alert and small and sharply moved though she would deny it. Jessic was there, big and quiet, standing at the dock's edge with his arms folded, and his face wearing the open, careful look of a man attending something important. Aaron stood at the water's edge in his good shirt, the one without the honey stains, the dark linen one he wore to Garant, and Vola came out of her house and came to stand beside him, and she had done something different with her hair. Left it down, the thick black weight of it loose around her shoulders instead of braided back, just two narrow strands held at the temples, and she was wearing the leather bodice and the flax linen shirt the way she always did, because this was not a costume occasion, it was a true occasion, and she was as she was, which was what he had chosen. She stood beside him, facing the water. He stood beside her, facing the water. Their hands found each other. The river moved below them, broad and brown and ancient and completely indifferent to human or orc ceremony and perfect for that. In front of witnesses, Vola said, clearly and without hesitation, I say that I take Aaron Rhodes as my bonded partner. My protection is his protection. My hearth is his hearth. My strength stands beside his and will not be withdrawn. This is my word at the water. A bird called somewhere in the reed beds. The mist moved. Aaron looked at the river and felt the weight of it, not the ceremony, because there was no ceremony, but the truth of it, the plain and enormous truth of a life that, until this moment, had been missing the thing that was standing beside him. In front of witnesses, he said, I say that I take Vola Doomhammer as my bonded partner. Whatever I have is hers, whatever I am is with her. I will stand beside her and I will not leave. He paused because he wanted to say one more thing, the thing underneath the formal thing. I see you, he said. I have always seen you, and I am not going anywhere. She turned to look at him. Her amber eyes were bright, not with tears, because Vola Doomhammer was not a woman who wept in public, but with something equal to it, something full and deep and real behind the gold. She gripped his hand hard. Word bond, she said quietly for him. Word bond, he said back. Maren made a sound behind them that was absolutely not a sob. Jessic cleared his throat with the careful vigor of a man also not doing anything of the sort. The dawn came in full then, the color arriving all at once, the gray giving way to amber and rose, and the particular warm gold of an autumn morning on the delta, when the mist burns off and the water shows you the sky, and the sky is very large and very clean, and the world, in that moment, contains no smallness at all. Aaron turned to Vola and she turned to him, and he put both arms around her and she let him completely, no distance, no held breath, the full warmth of her against him, her face against his neck, her arms coming around him with a strength that was not measured or careful, that was simply what she had and offered without calculation. He held her back with everything he had. Vola, he said quietly into her hair. She said, Are you happy? A pause. Not hesitation, consideration, because she answered things correctly. Then quietly, directly, Yes, I am happy. Another pause, even shorter. Are you? He held her tighter. The river moved. The bees were waking in the hives. The market would open in an hour and Maren would go home and tell everyone in Brackhollow, with enormous efficiency, what she had witnessed at dawn on the West Channel. The world was large and warm and full. Yes, he said, I am. They stood at the water's edge in the risen light, the beekeeper and the widow, the human man and the orc woman, and the loneliness that had lived in both of them. That specific, shaped, long-tenanted emptiness was gone, not papered over or ignored, but genuinely, solidly gone, replaced by something that had no name in either of their languages better than simply this. What this is, what we are. What we have made here at the edge of the water in a swamp town, where the mist burns off by mid-morning and the bees fly until dark. Vola pulled back enough to look at his face. She traced the line of his jaw with her thumb, the same way she had on the platform the first time, but now there was nothing tentative in it. It was the touch of a woman on familiar ground, her ground. "Come inside," she said. "I will make tea." He laughed, an actual, unguarded laugh, the kind that does not come from effort, and she looked at the sound of it with an expression of something so warm it could not quite be called anything other than love. He followed her up the steps and through the door, and the door closed behind them, quiet and complete, not a punctuation and not a pause but an arrival, the kind of closing that is also an opening, the kind that means something has finally, exactly, come to rest. Outside, the river moved past the cypress legs of the stilt-house with its old, constant patience, and the autumn light lay gold across the water, and the bees were already at work.